All right, so then the last thing that we're going to do for this section is an example where we use both the law of syllogism and the law of detachment. All right, so if you're given this statement, if you live in Accra, then you live in Ghana. If you live in Ghana, then you live in Africa. And then we're going to say Asia lives in Accra. So then we need to make a conclusion based off this. All right, so it really doesn't matter which way you do this. You can do the law of detachment first, and then the law of syllogism. We're going to do the law of syllogism first. All right, so here we have the statement. If you live in Accra, then you live in Ghana. All right, so we have our hypothesis, then our conclusion, where our hypothesis states you live in Accra. All right, and then our conclusion states you live in Ghana. All right, so there's our first conditional. So then in order for us to use the law of syllogism, one of our conclusions has to be the hypothesis in another statement. So then if we look at the next statement, it says, if you live in Ghana, then you live in Africa. So here, the conclusion, you live in Ghana, is our hypothesis in the next statement. So now we know that we can at least use the law of syllogism. All right, so then we can use if Q, then R. All right, so our Q, same thing, was you live in Ghana. And then our R is you live in Africa. All right, so now based off the law of syllogism, because we have a conclusion that is our hypothesis in the next statement, we can then go ahead and go straight to the statement that if you live in Accra, then you live in Africa. All right, so we can say if you live in Accra, then you live in Africa. All right, so that's the statement that we're able to make based on the law of syllogism, because we had our conclusion that was our hypothesis in the next statement, or one conclusion was a hypothesis in the one statement. So then we can go ahead and say if P, then R. All right, we can jump straight to if P, then R. Now, the law of detachment is making a statement that's true. All right, so in order for us to use the law of detachment, we have to then first verify that Accra is in fact in Ghana. And over here we have a map of Africa. All right, and here they close in and they tell us that this part is Ghana. And then they say Accra is right here. So Accra is in fact Ghana. So we know that this first statement, if you live in Accra, then you live in Ghana, is true because we have a true hypothesis and a true conclusion. So then the overall statement for this one is true. So we know the law of detachment, we know that this first conditional is true. All right. Then our second one, same thing. All of these countries in here are all located as part of Africa. So if you live in Ghana, then you live in Africa. Well, once again, there's Ghana. So Ghana is part of Africa. So if you live in Ghana, true statement. Then you live in Africa, true statement. So both of those are true. So then our second conditional is true. So now, since we have two true conditionals, we think we can then go ahead and say that Alyssa lives in Africa. Well, then the statement that we can finally make, the overall conclusion, is that Alyssa lives in Africa. Right? That is the conclusion that we're able to make because of our law of syllogism. We know that if you live in Accra, then you live, or if you live in Accra, then you live in Africa. And then we're told that Aissa lives in Accra. So if she lives in Accra, then she has to live in Africa. Right? And that's the conclusion that we can make using both the law of syllogism and the law of detachment.